Hi, and welcome to the OrgDev podcast. So what does it really take to build a responsive, high-performing organization, one that learns, adapts, and endures? Today, we're joined all the way from California from one of the world's leading thinkers on organization agility, Dr. Chris Worley, co-author of The Agility Factor. Now, we did offer to fly over to Chris, but Chris said Zoom was fine. But we're so pleased that he's accepted our invitation. In this episode, we're going to discuss how leaders can loosen their grip to create a space for adaptation, how OD practitioners can play a catalytic role, and why diversity, identity, and informal rules might matter more to agility than we think. Dr. Chris is a globally recognized expert in organization development, agility, and strategic change. He's authored more than 100 articles, book chapters, and presentations on organization effectiveness, and his extensive work spans academia, consulting, and executive education, and he's helped shape how leaders think about change and continuous transformation. He's a research professor of management at Pepperdine Business School, and he's visiting clinical professor of strategy at Rennes Business School as well, and he's also affiliated senior research scientist at USC Center for Effective Organizations. Naturally, with all this incredible experience, it's underpinned by professional qualifications. He has a doctorate in strategic management and a master's in OD, and he's co-authored the market-leading text Organization Development and Change, now in its 12th edition. And this was actually my first book that introduced me into the fascinating world of OD. Now, they always say don't meet your heroes, but this couldn't be further from the truth in this case. What we really admire about Chris is that he's provocative, he's outspoken, and challenges OD professionals to do better and be better as well. So thank you so much for joining us, Chris.
We're really excited to have you with us. So before, we've got lots of questions about agility and all of that stuff, but before we just give us a bit more of an overview about the work you do. What does your work involve now?
I told my wife I'm in the process of retiring. I think I'm in the 6th or 7th year of the 4-year slowdown plan. And so I've been, trying to back away a little bit. I don't teach quite as much as I used to. I don't consult as much as I used to. I've still got some things I want to say, so I'm still writing quite a bit and trying to figure stuff out. And I enjoy, like you said, I'm connected with Pepperdine and USC here in the States. I work with the Rennes Business School over in France with their executive ed. I'm about to start a year-long fellowship with the Singapore government and the Civil Service College to try and talk about what agility looks like in a government setting. So I just kind of keep myself busy doing things that are fun now. I suppose that's the retiring part of it. I'm trying to find stuff that's fun to do, and I still stay in touch with a lot of my students and keep monitoring their careers and trying to be supportive and helpful, and do a podcast every once in a while and try and keep my fingers in the mix a little bit. So
we're very glad that you do. So thinking about the agility factor, you co-wrote that, and you describe in there organization agility as a deliberately cultivated capability. So what is it that's so important that it's not just it's a deliberately cultivated capability? That's quite different, isn't it? It's just something that's kind of there. You have to intentionally build it.
Yeah, you can't buy it. It's not something that exists out in the marketplace that you go buy. You have to learn it, right? And that's it's agility's hard. I think there's this notion that, well, if I respond to this particular challenge, whether it's the tariffs that's happening today or AI, or if I just figure out how to adapt to a particular challenge, then I'm being agile. Right. And so people say, well, let's change the meeting from Thursday to Friday. We're being agile. No. It's much more of an organization design issue and an organization development issue than I think a lot of people give it maybe credit for. It's hard. And so there is this notion of committing to it, committing resources to it, understanding what it means. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding still. I mean, I really like the little book. I do. But it was almost 10 years ago now that it came out. And I never expected agility to have this long life. Even when we first did the first book with Ed Lawler on Built to Change, it's had this life that I think is kind of interesting given the times, the technology, and everything that's going on. it's hard. People still misunderstand it.
Yeah.
And,
We love
figuring that out. Yeah.
Yeah, we love a definition here. So what is your definition of agility? You said kind of definition matters.
Well, that's actually a hard question because I've been changing it lately. Right. And so I think in the book we talked about agility being a capability to repeat change over and over again such that it sustains performance. We talked about organization change when and where it matters. And I think that's held up pretty well. But lately, the same friend of mine, Tom Cummings, who I write the textbook with, he and I are working on a paper now, and we've tried to say, okay, what have we learned in the last 10 years about agility and what's going on? And so now we've modified it a little bit based on practice and research and stuff. So agility now is a built-in capacity and a learned capability. So that's a difference now. It's not just a capability. There's also a capacity component to it. And I hope we're not splitting academic hairs when we make a distinction between capacity and capability, but we have, and we think it's important to make timely and sufficient change. So one of the misunderstandings I think about agility is that it's about speed, about how fast you go. I don't think that's true. I think it's about, can you make the change when you need to, and you make the right change, timely and sufficient. And then the part about sustained performance is held up really well too. So the capacity and capability to make timely and sufficient change when circumstances warrant, such that performance stays high. So that's the little shift. It's been a little shift.
And the research you talk about in the book kind of made a really strong link between agility and sustained high performance, didn't it? You talked about kind of...
Yeah. I think it's interesting because if you're a strategist, they're always talking about sustained competitive advantage, sustained high performance. And I'm just kind of, it's kind of funny to me. People don't, okay, what does that mean? What do you mean when you say sustained high performance? And then you go into the empirical research and they don't define it, or they do cross-sectional performance. No. Sustained over a long period of time. And then what does superior mean? Does it mean way above average? Does it mean better than the market? And then, what's the metric? Is it stock price? Is it profitability? And I do think Agility Factor did a good job of saying this is what it is. It's profitability, not stock price. It's above industry average for a long period of time. And that has held up pretty well, I think.
Yeah, and I guess is there a question about why broadening the definition of sustained high performance beyond profit? Is it all about profitability, or are there other factors we need to be thinking about in a kind of wider sense?
One of the wrestling that you do with, right, is there a single measure of performance? No. The debate we engaged in was, is it profitability or stock price? And tried to suggest that stock price, if you just look at what's happening in the markets right now. We talked about the taco, the market's performing pretty well, and then Trump announces a tariff and it goes down, and then he says, "Well, I didn't mean it. We're going to go back." There's quite a bit of volatility there that has nothing to do with management decision. And so we said, let's set that aside. That's another measure of performance. Let's talk about what managers can control to some extent, right? And work about profitability. Should we be talking about employee engagement? Should we be talking about sustainability? Should we be talking about inclusion and community engagement? Yes, all those things I think are legit measures of performance. But when it comes down to a single measure, we thought profitability is at least something that organizations, especially for-profit ones, would really be concerned about.
And I think one of the things we really sort of enjoy about it, because, if people get agility, I know I should be agile, but the book sort of defines 4 agility routines, which you can then sort of develop that discipline within the organization. And that's strategizing, perceiving, testing, and implementing, which are central to your model. Which of these do you find organizations most often struggle to do, and why?
It's interesting the way you ask the question. A lot of people will ask me which one is the most important, to which I say it's a system. And so you need all 4. The way you ask the question, which I think is interesting, is which one's the weakest. And across, I don't know, it's hard to say how many. One way of studying it is by organization. We've done that before. We probably got 60, 70 organizations that we've worked with. The other way is just to ask a lot of people, right? And just getting people from the C-suite to sort of say, what do you think it is? So, we got 400 or 500 of those. By far, the weakest one is the testing routine. And it's not that the organization doesn't encourage innovation, because test and learn, experimenting, innovating, prototyping things. It's not that they don't emphasize innovation. It's that they don't have the resource flexibility, and they don't learn. They don't do after action reviews. We got to go too fast. We have to hurry up. Everything's in hurry up mode. And so they don't take the time to reflect on, was that successful? Why was it successful? If it was a failure, why was it a failure? What do we learn from that? What would we do different next time? Organizations they struggle apparently to do that. And I think that's the bit, by far, that's the weakest one. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's interesting because you talk about 3M as like a poster child of an organization that's able to launch products. But you said part of what it does is it kind of is always sort of testing. It's always making sure that it's ready when the new opportunities come. So it looks like it's fast,
yes,
but it's not. It's just thorough.
Yes. It's prepared. That's what I've been trying to suggest. Is it's not about speed. It's about being prepared. And so in that sense, the perceiving routine becomes really important, because are you looking ahead? Are you looking into the future? Are you playing with the future, trying to understand what might happen because of AI or because of globalization or whatever? Are you thinking ahead so that when the future comes, you're sort of ready? 3M example is a testing example. And there's this built-in DNA inside of 3M that says, no matter whether this innovation was successful or not, let's do the action review. And what I found so interesting about that was not that they documented the successes, is that they documented the failures. And so why did something fail? Was it a technology? Was it a manufacturing process? Was it a materials issue? Was it a market? Was it a customer? What was the... And so they go through and they say, well, yeah, no, we didn't have the technology, or we didn't have the materials, or the market wasn't ready. And they stick that in their knowledge management system. Now, time passes. The technology arrives. The materials sciences becomes available. The market now has matured. Those two things are now fit. And it looks like they're fast, but they're really just prepared. So I thought that was a really interesting story.
Yeah, and I guess I'm really curious as well, because you see so much talking about it, which is we fail fast and all that. But, there isn't necessarily the psychological safety in organizations where it's like, let's draw attention to my failure. It's often like, let's just brush that one under the carpet and let's move on.
Exactly.
So is there something specific about the organizations that are good at testing, that have something in their culture DNA that makes it okay, and it's just part of our sort of modus operandi?
Yeah, you talked about the psychological safety part of it, right? I think it's a great concept. And if you read Amy's stuff, she talks about, she lays out why she thinks organizations create psychological safety and some of the things they have to do. My biggest criticism of the other parts of that movement is everybody thinks it's a good idea, and everybody says you should do it, but they don't tell you how to do it. Oh, that's kind of a missing piece. Amy does a good job in her book trying to address that, but I think organizations need to go beyond saying they should, and that requires some. I'll suggest that requires some interpersonal competence as opposed to an organization one, where leaders. And I'm trying to think. I think it was Lencioni in his book on teams. Leaders go first, right? So being able to display some vulnerability, being willing to reflect on myself and engage others in reflecting on my behaviors, so that it's okay to admit that I tried this and it didn't work, but I had the right intent. I think there's some interpersonal things that we have to do. So even, I still try to do a tea group every once in a while in my life just to keep the instrument sharp. I was exploring that idea with a group in the fall. It was a year ago almost. I think there's some interpersonal competence that comes with that, and being able to say, it's okay, and to create that. I think the leader creates it by being vulnerable themselves and demonstrating it. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's about, I guess it's like sort of creating the environment, because a lot of these, senior leadership team meetings, the environment is quite intense, isn't it? You have to sort of create certain conditions for that to flourish as well.
Yes, exactly. All right, and it does sort of fall on the shoulders of the leaders a little bit. I don't let team members off the hook. You too have to take a risk. And I think there's some pretty decent research out there that says, promotions and advancement in careers is partly a function of, hey, I'm trying to make things better here. Let's get out. And even if you do fail, okay, people look at what you did and what you were trying to do and say, here's somebody who's trying to make a difference. Let's pay attention to them. Maybe they need to be on the high potential list and get into leadership development and maybe give them a promotion or something. I think there's some decent research on that says, it's not always, oh, what are they doing and are they creating psychological safety? It's, do I have enough sort of confidence in myself to get out there and say, here's an idea. Let's try this. Let's try it. There must be a better way.
When you think about the kind of the role of organisation development practitioners in kind of enabling agility, what can all OD practitioners do, and how can they support their organisations?
I certainly think agility should be an outcome of ongoing organization development effort, right? So agility describes the design that allows an organization to make these timely and sufficient changes, right? How did we get to that capability? That's where I think the organization development people should come into play, is saying, okay, I've got to change. The organization is under some pressure or sees an opportunity. It's both opportunity based and problem based. Here's a change on opportunity. How can I perform this change in a way that contributes to perceiving, testing, strategizing, implementing, right? I think that's the stance I try to get OD people to think about, in terms of, it's not just about this change. What's the diagnosis? What's the system? What's the intervention we're going to make? How do we change? That's all important, but is the context of all of that saying, how can I use this opportunity to build one of those routines and create an organization that has more flexibility, adaptability, resilience, nimbleness, what the metaphor of the day is around agility. So yeah, huge. I think it's huge. If I was criticizing OD, it'd be, and I got this metaphor from a friend of mine. His name will blurt out in my head here in a second. But what he says is, there's two kinds of organization development people. There's the kind that when they come into an organization, internal or external, you come in and you look down and you say, oh my gosh, these people are hurting. They're suffering. Their engagement scores are low, whatever. I have to help them. And we have tools that can help people. He says there's another kind of OD person that when he comes in, he says, yes, those people are hurting. I wonder why. And they look up to the structures and systems and processes, right, that are causing the pain. And so I think organization development people need to have a nice blend of those two perspectives, right? And say, look, the system and the design of the organization is suboptimal, and that's one of the reasons people are suffering. Now, people may be suffering because they need some new skills, and I see that for sure. But it's that blend now that I'm trying to push OD towards, is seeing both of those as legitimate places to intervene.
Yeah, but it's a very seductive place to be, isn't it? Going down and working with the people and making them feel better and look like I finished a day. Everyone's feeling better now, aren't they? Whereas the system stuff is messy and it's complex, and you don't see the benefits of your work straight away, do you?
Political, power and politics. A long time ago, there was a chapter in the annual review of psychology, and Bob Quinn, I think, was one of the authors. And he said OD often hides behind its values, right? We believe in learning and democracy and participation and all those stuff. And once we say those are our values, we hide behind them and say, well, these are important. And somebody challenges it who has power and authority. And we say, well, no, we believe in these things and you're not doing them. I'm not going to work with you. Well, now we've just thrown away an opportunity. So, finding ways to speak truth to power, finding ways to recognize that I think a lot of OD people just don't appreciate the complexity of a senior executive's life, right? If you're sitting in the CEO chair, all the things that are happening in your world every day and all the different demands and stakeholders and things that are it's a really hard job. And I think a lot of people in OD might be a little too naive about that. So it's about understanding these people have a lot of responsibility and it's a tough job, making tough calls, making trade-offs every day. And so we have to find a way my metaphor is I got to find a way to ride up next to them, not confront them, but be with them and sort of understand all those things and as appropriate, find ways to sort of nudge them and say, well, here's an opportunity. You could move and pivot a little, change direction just a little bit in the way that we've been talking about to make the organization better.
But it's a real challenge though, isn't it? Because if you've got a senior leader that's overwhelmed with complexity, generally what OD sees is complexity. So it is helping them embrace reality for what it is. So it makes their world even more complex. So the challenge is how do you present things in a way that makes things a little simpler, but without dumbing it down almost, isn't it?
But this is where I think when I call out dialogic OD as opposed to diagnostic OD, I really don't like that. I think that's a false dichotomy. I think drawing attention to that. But I will say some of the things that the dialogic folks have done in bringing complexity thinking and into our field is they begin to say, yes, it is complex. We do have to think in systems terms, right? And because it is complex, because it is fast moving, because a lot of things are emergent, what's important is the conversation, right? And as CEO, are you in conversation with multiple stakeholders? Are you taking the time to have conversation and listen and hear and debate? And out of that conversation, out of that complexity, often, sifts out in a, kind of way. It sifts out. And then I'll pick up another little phrase from the late, great Ed Schein. What's the next best, smallest, right thing I could do? Which I loved. I thought that was just, in a system that's complex and emergent, I'm not going to pull one lever and say I'm done. I'm going to look at the complexity of the whole thing, right? And say, wow, okay, here's something I can do that moves me in the direction I want to go right now. And so I do think that this notion of dialogue, of sitting with complexity, I tell organizations every day you're asked to perform every day. You're on, if I can use a sports analogy, the football players, they perform once a week and they're practicing all the time. When do you get a chance to practice in organizations? You don't get a chance to just step back and say, I need to just think about this a little bit with some people who have different perspectives. And let's have that conversation, debate, dialogue around all the different forces that are acting on us. And based on that, what kind of emerges as the next best, smallest, right move we could make. And, trying to create that space. I think OD people are really good at creating that little space where we could have that conversation.
And I guess part of it is managing the expectations, because a lot of people are addicted to the lever or the silver bullet, aren't they? So it's just like,
that's absolutely true. Biggest problem with agility, with trying to get organization. I want agility. So what lever do I pull? What is the silver bullet? No, sorry. You might have to have somebody else help you. I can't do that. We need to understand your system and all of its complexity and begin to talk about what's the next best, right, smallest. Absolutely true. I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and just thinking back to the way you defined agility, that kind of building in capacity, that can be quite uncomfortable for leaders and organizations, that we're building in capacity to, because it's I want to be efficient, we want to be productive, we want to be lean, we don't want capacity, and it's like, but that's exactly what you need.
That's exactly right. Yeah. I could have the capability to change, but if I don't have the slack resources, I don't have a structure that has more capacity for growth than another kind of structure. You nailed it. That's why we put capacity in there, because if the capacity doesn't exist, then the capability is worthless. I've got to have that. That's how it links directly to sustained above average profitability. I can't have can't exist without the other now. So it really becomes important to think about, I'm no longer, this is I get into trouble so much when I talk about this. I can no longer sort of sit idly by while they talk about maximizing shareholder wealth and maximizing profitability. I can't. I said, okay, then we can't talk about agility. I'm going to talk to you about being able to have above average profitability for a long period of time, but I'm not going to maximize the profitability, because that's not sustainable. Sustained high performance. If you want sustained high performance, you can't maximize profitability. That thinking drives out scarce resources or slack resources. It drives out any resource that isn't directly available to value add. So that's well, you nailed it. That's why we put capacity in there. It's got to be in there, or else you can't sustain performance. Just isn't possible.
Yeah, you said something that we love. I think you said efficiency makes you fragile.
Yes. Yeah. There's something about fragility is not agility. Efficient systems are fragile. And I go back to, I remember I think we were talking about the podcast and stuff. I was on my way over to France. I was halfway from LA to London. Had a stopover in London. I was halfway over, and they turned the plane around and went back to LA because of the fire outside of Heathrow. One transformer caught on fire and wiped out all of Heathrow. That's not an agile system. That's not a robust system. That's a fragile system. It was probably very efficient. That's it, right? If if efficiency is the altar at which we worship, right, we're going to create fragility and not agility.
Just a sort of a sidebar question, because I think you sort of said you have two different types of opinion. One is research-based. You've done a lot of thinking about it. Another are like opinions like, if you've got your values and that. One of the things that we're going to see a lot over the next 12 to 24 months is how companies are responding to AI. And, we're announcement yesterday, IBM is just gutting its HR team because it spotted opportunities to automate. How can organizations retain agility? Because there's a big challenge in how you approach AI. Are you going for efficiency, or are you looking for opportunities here? What's your thoughts in terms of how organizations can approach this?
It's the same logic. I think it's really interesting. That's why I think this whole agility thing has been interesting, and how long it's lasted. It's still a relevant concept in the age of AI. So if your organization adopts, and most organizations are adopting some kind of responsible AI, human-centered AI policy that says, okay, as we use AI, we want it to be explainable, we want it to be reliable, we want it to be fair, not full of bias, we want security and privacy. These are all really crucial things with respect to adopting AI as an individual, and do I get on and use Copilot or ChatGPT or Claude or whatever you're working with, right? But as you go to use cases, and we look at work processes, and we disaggregate the work processes and reassemble what can be automated and what can be augmented, and as we go through all of those things, I've kind of adopted the human-centered AI thing from Stanford. I think they're doing really cool work. Is the policy there? Is it active? And does it have some teeth? Right? I see a lot of people checking the box. Yes, we have a responsible AI policy, but it comes back to what you were saying before. Is AI being adopted within a regime of efficiency? Because AI is goal-oriented and it's learning. And if you're trying to use AI to become more efficient, you'll create a fragile system. And, I could get pretty dark pretty fast on this stuff, right? Because I've been, I don't know, I think my Instagram algorithm is really getting good because I'll stop and listen to the different CEOs of OpenAI and Anthropic and Google, and I'll listen to them talk at different speeches. They're talking pretty dark stuff about replacing jobs. And I was, my wife and I were driving down to Southern California, and I asked her, I said, can you think of a job that AI can't replace? No. I don't know. Have you seen these robots? The robots that they've got now, that what they can do, it's amazing. So the question I think organizations have to ask is, what future are you trying to build? Are you trying to build a efficient future with AI? I think you're now talking about the demise of organizations, right? Are you trying to build an organization where AI supports human purpose? Now we're talking about a jointly optimized. You know what's interesting? This is a long answer to your question. I apologize.
But a good one. Keep going. Keep going.
What's really interesting to me is this notion of human-centered AI has brought back an old classic in OD, which is socio-technical work systems. We're now going back to some of those principles of jointly optimized human technical processes. And do you really believe that? Do you really believe in jointly optimized? I'm not going to maximize the technology, right? Because then the people go away. I want to jointly optimize both of them so that we move forward, technologies and humans together, moving towards human purposes, human progress, and not the elimination of it. You can get into all kinds of Matrix and Skynet, Terminator kinds of scenarios that nobody wants, but the gold rush is on. So everybody's adopting AI as quickly as they can and putting it into work processes and use cases.
So there is a role for OD in this then, isn't there? Because you can really approach the whole thing tactically. We've got to make our year-end budget. Look, I can spot cost savings. I'll be the hero of the month if I can do this.
Yeah.
But so organizations will become what they become.
Yeah.
Without sort of intentional thought. So OD, does that have an opportunity to take a step back here and make sure we're asking, like I said, the right question?
You nailed it, right? Intentional thought. Are we being conscious and aware of what we're contributing to? I think in speed now, sort of, Peter Block had a great phrase. It was, speed is a defense against depth. Right? We're going so fast, we forgot that we should be thinking about what we're doing. And some decisions require some depth. Let's go back to our CEO conversation we were just having. Does the CEO and the leadership team take time to think about things? And if we're just going fast, if we just got to meet the quarterly budgets or expectations of the market, will we adopt and put AI in place without thought about whether we're actually replacing humans?
It's just because we can doesn't mean we should.
Because we can.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's
and
interesting.
It contributes to productivity and efficiency. Yeah.
I've got a teenage son, and him and his friends have been learning Japanese on Duolingo, and because they've now replaced a lot of their staff with AI, his friend group have all opted out. They've all deleted Duolingo. They're not using it anymore because in protest against the replacement of humans with AI. So it'd be interesting to see how people respond to organizations.
It is interesting.
Yeah.
So many pressures, social, technical, financial, personal, so many pressures pushing us to go faster and faster and faster. And the algorithms are so good. I get my little dopamine rush through my Instagram feed. And am I thinking about it? That's where that perceiving routine, I think, comes in so important. It's you would see an alternative future that is AI dominated, and we just don't have a role in that. okay, is that the future that I'm really trying to aim for or angle for? Or do I see all the really cool parts of AI and what it could do? Bill Passmore has this great line, AI is leading us to the place where everybody knows everything about anything. Okay, so AI is not going to be a competitive advantage. There was just a really good article in the Sloan Management Review just recently, very short little article. It says AI is not going to result in competitive advantage because everybody will have it. It'll be a commodity. The question is how we're going to use it and who's smart enough to think about how to use it for human progress, human purposes. So that becomes the little pivot point. And so I've been talking to organizations about what are your stakes in the ground? What are the stakes in the ground? And I think the human-centered AI policy is a potential stake in the ground, but you got to back that up with other policies and design incentives and leadership development and all that stuff that we talk about in OD. You got to back that policy up with some teeth.
And going back to your original discipline, which is you got your doctorate in strategy, didn't you?
Yeah.
So part of it is, do you get a sense that organisations are potentially exploring the different scenarios that are out there? Is that a sense that you're getting at the moment?
It's a really good question. I don't have a straight answer for you on that one. A lot of times when I talk to organizations and ask them, they'll say, yes, we have an organization that does that, who's worried about it and thinks about it and runs alternative scenarios. Oh, that's great. Then I have to ask the hard question. When was the last time your leadership team had the conversation with that group about alternative futures? And that's when the room gets silent. And I say, okay, good on you. You got that. You're going too fast and the speed is overtaking the depth. And you got to bring those people in more often. You got to have those conversations more often, and lay your existing set of priorities, initiatives, 1 to 2 year, tactical strategies against against those alternative futures, and saying, are we aiming for this and are we moving toward it? Yeah, that's a tough one. I don't have a straight answer. I wish I had some. I have some people who are doing some really cool stuff. On the futuring side of things, but I don't have a sense of how well it's being integrated into decision making right now.
Yeah, I think particularly if OD is going to start mixing in these areas, which it has absolute right to do, it's about entering the language of that area, isn't it? And I remember you sort of saying an example that you went into, for example, Microsoft, and you were saying strategy. What's your strategy? And they were like getting blank looks back, and then you heard that they used the word bet.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, it turns out they were extremely strategic. They just didn't call it that word.
They didn't call it that word. Yeah, that's right. And so I think there's two ways to go there. As OD people, we have to be flexible enough and know our craft well enough not to be hung up by our own jargon, right? To enter into a system, and again, I don't care whether you're an internal or an external, to enter into a system and listen to what they're talking about and be able to put their language into a framework and say, they are talking about strategy, or they are talking about systems or incentives or motivation or culture or whatever it is. They are talking about it. So how can we be confident enough in our craft that we don't have to have other people talk like us to understand it? That includes AI. I've watched some really interesting videos trying to explain to me what AI is. It's a probabilistic thing that predicts the next word and how that minimum calculus and the curves and this thing to recognize language. Oh, that's very interesting. I wouldn't know C++ from Python in terms of coding, but I have a better understanding now of what people are doing and how it's working, and just enough to sort of say, okay, I think I can help them think about how they're going to apply it. Now I go back into my world, in the socio-technical world, and say, are human needs being considered along with the technical economic needs? Are both of those being considered? And I'm trying to optimize both instead of maximizing one. Are we doing that or not? Now I'm helping. Now I'm back into helping, and I don't have to know the technical aspects, all the details of of an AI algorithm? Yeah, that's a great question. We have to be better at understanding our craft.
Hi, we're just pausing this interview for a moment. Have you ever finished an episode of the OrgDev podcast and wish you had a cheat sheet that summarizes all of the key points? Us too, so we made one. It's called From Pod to Practice, and each week in our newsletter we'll share a 2-page summary of the latest OrgDev episode, and it includes key takeaways, a reflection prompt, and one small action you can try.
And it's all in a digital format with space at the end to add your own notes and reflections, and it's designed to help you take the learning from the podcast into your day-to-day work. So to get your copy, just sign up to our Next Step to Better newsletter. The link's in the show notes, or you can visit our website at www.distinction.live to get the latest From Pod to Practice in your inbox. And let us know what you think. We'd love to get your feedback. One question we like to ask everybody who comes on the podcast is how you got into OD. What was your journey into the organisation development field?
Okay, it's Ann Farmer-Herm and I did a little study long time ago about this very question, and I don't think I'm any different than a lot of people. I was working for the Forest Service. I have 2 master's degrees. The first one is in outdoor recreation. Okay, and I was really concerned about how people. My research question at the time is, why do people destroy that which they're trying to enjoy? Right? Why do people go out into the mountains and the wilderness and fishing and camping, and in doing that and enjoying that, they're actually destroying the resource they're trying to. I thought that was an interesting question. So I was playing with the Forest Service, and they were having a safety training one day, and the person got up there and started talking about safety and how you should drive and be careful, and rather than sort of go on for a lecture, which is what we all thought was going to happen for half a day, the person, turned out it was an OD person, sort of made some comments and made some provocative observations about things that we don't do every day with regard to safety. Then he said, I want you to break into small groups and talk about the extent to which this is happening in your world. Oh, well, I thought I was going to sit here for 3 hours and listen. I didn't know I was going to have to do some work. And so we did it, and we talked about it and all the different things. And afterwards, I went up to him and I said, I really didn't think, I was going to do that. I haven't seen anybody do that kind of a training before. I'm an organization development practitioner. So that kind of stuck with me. That was an interesting way of doing things. This is a long time ago now, right? As I was leaving the master's degree, in outdoor recreation, we had I think it was Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan in the United States. And so from Democrat to Republican, and the conservative sort of Reagan thing, a lot of opportunities sort of dried up. I thought I might go for my doctorate at that point, but there was no money and I was broke. And I talked to a friend, and he was working. He had gotten his MBA at Pepperdine, and he was working for a OD firm. I've heard of OD. I've heard. And I said, I'm looking for jobs if you know of anything. And he says, well, actually, our firm is growing, and you're an interesting character because you understand systems. I was an economist and a biologist and and you know how to write, because I wrote my thesis and articles and stuff, and you're a psychologist. You could be an OD practitioner. So the firm hires me, right, as a kind of a junior little OD person running around doing policies and procedures. And this is the last part of the long story. I apologize. One of the principals in the firm was a guy named Walt Ross. Walt Ross became the associate dean for academic affairs at Pepperdine University, and he was one of the key professors in the Pepperdine MSOD program. And he said, come after the consulting thing, the consulting firm was kind of petering out. He said, come work for me and I'll pay for your master's in OD.
Done deal.
So I had no intention at all of going into OD. I was a tree-hugging environmentalist.
Love it. I love the stories of people's roots in. It's always interesting.
All these different people in the history of our field came to OD from different places. It's what I think makes our field kind of interesting, because we all bring sort of slightly different perspectives into it.
And what do you enjoy most about the work these days? What really sparks your interest in the work that you do?
That's actually kind of that's an easy one. it's 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 working with a system which is made up of people, and then watching the arc of their change. By the end of working with them for 6 months or 18 months or whatever, to see that arc. And it doesn't matter whether it's a student, it could be a student in the MSOD program and over 18 months watching their growth and development in the field, or it's a client and seeing them come to you, a year and a half later and say, everything you asked me to do, I've never done before. And to which I always say, yeah, that's why we call it change. and then the next thing is, but yes, I wasn't sure what I was doing, but you made it feel safe. Right.
There's the change in there as well.
Yeah. So, I do think there's some truth to this notion that all organization change is preceded by a personal one. I think there's some truth to that. And certainly working with people and being able to see, oh, there's another way to look at this, and see them integrate behavioral science and social science with economics and marketing and finance, and seeing how those things all fit together. That gives me juice.
And when you were developing as an OD practitioner, obviously one of the big things they talk about is self as instrument. It's a much talked about concept, but little defined as well. Mm-hmm. What was your sort of process of developing that sort of self as instrument? And what can we learn today, so people that are going into the field that hear it and want to do it, but how would they go about doing it?
I'm very saddened by the decline in the whole sensitivity training, T groups piece of things. Because every time I talk to people who I admire, who I think are good at what they do, and I ask them about, almost always there's something related to that process of being in an unstructured group process. Tavistock is a big part of that. NTL was a big part of it. Mien Chung Jug, who passed away recently, she was a big advocate of that stuff. Getting in and learning about yourself and your strengths and weaknesses, and where your origin story comes from, and just really having a clear sense of who you are develops inside of inside of us an extra database that as a process is unfolding, recognizing how that process is affecting me personally and the emotions that I feel and all that, and saying, wow, if I'm listening to this presentation and I'm bored to tears, I'll bet you other people are too. And I can ask a question. Like I go, excuse me, some of this is really interesting, but I'm really checking out because I'm not seeing what the point is or whatever. I can make an intervention. So the whole process consultation, the stuff that Ed did with Humble Consulting and stuff, the T group movement, I wish we could get more OD people into that. And this is a fair criticism. They think they're in therapy, and maybe therapy's a good thing. We should be talking about having people more in therapy. But this is not the way they conduct these when it's done right. These T groups and sensitivity. It's not therapy. It's just learning about who you are and how you feel in situations and how other people see you, and sort of appreciating and understanding that, so that you're not walking around in some bubble thinking, oh, I'm the best thing since sliced bread. People see me as having strengths and weaknesses. And can I understand that? And being in that, and that's not therapy. That's just learning how I get in my own way.
Yeah, because those T groups are incredibly powerful, aren't they? Because you suddenly start to understand how you respond and what your needs are. Because in the moment when you're in amongst as a facilitator in a group, everyone's projecting onto you. their hopes, fears, anxieties,
Yes.
whatever.
Yes.
And you've got to unpack, what is my stuff?
Yes.
What is it
Yes.
about me wanting to feel safe and comfortable in this group? And
Yes.
what's your stuff? But it has to happen really quickly, doesn't it?
Has to happen very quickly. Dick Beckhart was the great one, right? He didn't use the word stuff when he talked about it, but he would say your stuff, my stuff, and our stuff. And knowing, right, that I am uncomfortable with conflict from my upbringing or whatever it was, whatever I that's what is. I'm uncomfortable with conflict. And then to have a team in conflict. Am I intervening to make myself feel better? Or am I intervening because I'm going to help the team work the conflict productively? Those are things you got to learn, because otherwise you're working your own needs as opposed to working the needs of the client. And yes, I think you're spot on. They're projecting stuff onto you all the time. Well, you're the expert. Help me. And they're giving up their agency and making you responsible for their problem. Are you aware of that? Is that, or do you like being the person who scores all the goals, right? Yeah, no, I think it's great. I'm glad you asked that question. For all the work that I do in strategy and org design, the foundation of it is that personal growth work.
Yeah, because again, obviously, you've made a conscious choice to be both an academic and a practitioner. That's a really healthy combination in many ways, isn't it?
Well, I'm not an entrepreneur. One of the things I learned about myself is I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm uncomfortable with the uncertainty of, geez, I have a project today and money's coming in, and the project's over and I got no money coming in anymore, and I have to go run around and beat the band. So as an external entrepreneur, I would be pretty lousy at it. I liked having the comfort of a regular paycheck, and being a teacher and transferring knowledge that way. But I also knew that it's an uncomfortable place. I do feel discomfort about it sometimes. A lot of the academics think I'm not very academic, and a lot of the practitioners think I'm pretty academic. And so it's a rather liminal space that I'm in, right? And I've learned to live with that, right? But I run around, I go, God, I really would like, I wish people thought I was a good scholar. You haven't published in this journal or that journal or that journal. And the practitioners are like, well, he's an academic, therefore he knows some things about it. He's probably not very practical, but we'll listen to what he has to say. It's an odd place to be in. It works for me.
And what do you find most challenging about being that practitioner when you are out in the field? What things do you find most difficult?
Well, I think I'm just at a point in my life where finding work isn't that hard anymore. Part of it is the writing, part of it's I get calls from people. But it was hard for a long time, especially having started an OD on this more micro-oriented side. T groups, Dick Beckhart, Bob Tannenbaum, Ed Schein, Warner Burke, those were all the people who taught me. And it was very micro group-oriented stuff. And as I practiced a little bit, I kept noticing the organization stuff, the look up stuff. And so getting to that point where I could do more work at the organization level, certainly in my career, I just turned 70. So I'm like, I wish I knew then what I know now. So making that change was hard. And I had to keep sticking my nose into broader and broader issues. And that was hard. Well, you're an OD person. You're supposed to do coaching and stuff. No. I'm an OD person, and I want to get involved in that messy political power stuff. That was hard. That didn't go as fast as I wanted it to go.
Brilliant. And a question we wanted to ask as well is, your book was my gateway drug into OD. So the OD and Change book, since its 5th edition, it's now on its 12th edition.
Right.
What are some of the standout changes that you've sort of modified about it in that time? Or has it sort of stayed consistent? The principles still remain the same?
I think there's a lot of it that stays the same. I think a lot of the first principles stay the same. I'll tell you a couple of things in this version of the book that really did change quite a bit, maybe 3. I'll say the third one first. We we got tired of the book being 700 pages. And, if it's a gateway drug, you want a little injection a little faster than have it. If I'm going to take the drug.
And went straight to the.
And so we spent a lot of time just looking at it and saying, what's the essence of it, right? And so the 12th edition now is much more concise. And that's just a process thing. We just thought that was important. It doesn't look nearly as impressive on your bookshelf as the other one does, but I think there's some principles there that are the same. The two things that I think were substantive changes. One is we had to sort of figure out, in the context of the pandemic, Me Too movement, Black Lives Matter, what does that DEI chapter look like? And so we really scrubbed and revised and rewrote and thought really hard about that chapter to say, what is OD's place in DEI or DEI's place in OD? And one of the things I think we landed on that I hope people find insightful is that diversity is not the issue. Diversity exists. There is a diverse workforce. The workforce does have different perspectives, philosophically, racially, sexually. There is a diverse workforce. That's not the issue. Now, organizations can make it the issue. Should I hire more diverse people? Do I prefer having a homogenous group of folks in there? We can sort of set that one aside. The real issue is inclusion. And have you created an organization that is inclusive and celebrates the diversity that exists? And if you want to go beyond that and get into equity, equality, justice, so be it. But the first question is inclusion and acknowledging and recognizing that the workforce is diverse. All right, so that chapter, I think, is a pretty big change from prior things. The second sort of substantive change that I talk about is for 7 editions that I've been involved with, and if you look for the prior editions when Edgar Hughes started it and Tom and Ed worked together, the definition of OD didn't change that much. We would tweak a word here or there, and Tom and I actually did resist quite a bit a lot of the noise within the field about there is no agreed upon definition. Nobody knows what it is. No, there's so many definitions. Well, okay, let's press pause for just 1 second and look across all those definitions. They're pretty much the same. And so I'm not sure what's behind, what the motivation behind, we don't know what it is. Oh my God. So we resisted for a long time, trying to fall into that black hole. And then we decided to fall into the black hole this time. And what we thought we saw was a shift from a field that was primarily oriented around applied behavioral science, leaning toward the psychology and the social psychology, a little bit into anthropology. And we started to recognize that it's more than just applied behavioral science, it's applied social science, that there's sociology involved, economics are involved. And so we went from applied behavioral science to applied social science. And we think that's more than just a little word tweak, right? Because I think OD people now have to appreciate. You can choose, right? I can choose to be involved in just applying behavioral science or psychology inside of organizations. Great. But I think the field now is more complex, and we had to acknowledge that. And we also said it's no longer about, it gets back to the earlier question that we had, which was, it's not about financial performance as effectiveness. It is now organizations are facing a multiple objective function. Financial performance, yes, but inclusion, sustainability, paying attention to our environmental and carbon footprint, community relationships. It is a much broader outcome that we're trying to get organizations, as we develop organizations, what we're trying to get them to pay attention to. So I think those two tweaks in the definition are more substantive than cosmetic. doesn't change the basic nature of who we are, but it acknowledges that we're trying to do something in the world now more than just self-actualize or help people actualize so personally, but to actualize the organization and society. So those are two pretty big changes that we thought we made.
And just pulling on two threads there, and there's some really rich threads to pull on there. I guess one of them is that OD, the kind of people that are drawn to it, love theory, love different things. And we are a magpie profession. We assimilate lots of different practices into our way of working. So does that mean that the OD definition will always continue to evolve, do you feel? Or
I hope so. I think, one of the best parts of OD is we're always a little counter dependent, right? Whatever people say the definition is, well, that's not the definition. We'll challenge. And so I think we've always done a good job of being reflective and self-critical. All right. My argument is we can't over-rotate on that and not get our butts out into the world and start and help organizations change themselves in ways that they want to. So where I do get crossways with some people is if I think we spend too much time navel gazing. Who are we? What are our values? What's our definition? We don't have one. Okay, there's this certain healthy part of that. But if that's all we're doing and we're not out there practicing and being in the world, I think that's a big mistake. Because
you can be quite precious, can't you? Like in the 20 years I've been doing OD, no one has ever picked up the phone and said, I want some OD.
Well, a lot of people don't call. I wrote a little blog about category killers. Right? I said, nobody who says they want OD. I think that's actually fair. And so as an OD person, do I run around and call myself an OD practitioner? Okay, so what do you do? I work on engagement. I'm employee engagement. I'm a team building. I do large group interventions. I'm a coach. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you think OD is team building, we need to go talk, right? All of these things, conflict resolution, engagement, strategic planning, mission, vision, values, organization, these are all part of OD, right? Each one of them is a piece of OD, but together they define the field, and what's underneath all of those is a process, right? There's a process of understanding the system and diagnosis. I get crosswise with the change management people a lot because most of the time the change management people pick up a change that has already been decided on, usually by powerful people because it's in their interest. That's not OD. OD is understanding the system bottom up, top down, sideways in. Who are we? What are we doing? Which way are we going? How are we trying to optimize on all of these objective functions? Financial, productivity, economic, marketing, all these things, right? And saying, okay, how are we moving this system in a way towards better social, environmental, economic outcomes? So,
and just one quick thread I wanted to put on as well, because I was in the gym listening to this, and I actually stopped what I was doing because you said because you were talking
affect people in so many ways.
I know. I was like, oh God, what is this? you were talking about DEIB, and basically you said the powerful elites are happy for you to tackle unconscious bias because it lets them off the hook. I just thought they were really, really wonderfully provocative. Like, let's challenge what we're doing kind of way.
Yeah. No, it becomes so narrow. All we're trying to do is find out whether or not people have unconscious bias. Of course they do. Of course they do. The question is, what do we do with that, right? Now that I have an awareness, right, I have certain microaggressions or I have certain, flat sides or hidden parts of myself that define that. Now what do I do with it? Okay, yeah, I can go work on myself. That's great. But I live in a system that is trying to provide employment, provide goods and services for society. How do I use that now as an advantage? That's what I mean when I say diversity already exists. It's already there. Each of us has strengths and weaknesses. Am I leveraging that in a system way to solve the problems that are affecting the world? And there's some real good criticisms of the DEI movement. Let's just say that. And a lot of times we've taken DEI and it's a bludgeon, and we're just going to beat people because you're unconsciously biased. I'm sorry. Okay, I need to figure out what to do with that.
Just a small question for you. So when you look back at your career in OD, what are a couple of the biggest lessons that you've learned and that you take forward with you?
Biggest lessons. Well, it is in the book. I think we kind of had this funny little thing. You're always told to keep it simple, stupid, right? KISS. And in the book we said it's the system, stupid, ITSS. And I think that's I think that has been an important sort of learning that I probably had to relearn several times, right? And it helps me to remember to look down and look up, right? Because it is a system, and we are working in a systems field, and there are no simple answers. There's no silver bullets. There's no one lever to pull like we talked about. So I do think that's a big deal. I think a lot of people are often surprised at the role that the self as instrument stuff plays in the work. Yes, I want to change the organization. Yes, I want performance to be better. Yes, I want more inclusion, whatever. But the key to helping that happen is, do you know what it means to help, and how even as I talk strategy, I mean, for a long time there was a I would say in the third quarter of my career, the single most common request I got was, we're not really clear about our strategy and how we're organized. Could you help us with that? Yeah, I would love to do that. And, oh, by the way, the team dynamics really suck. So could you help us with that too? Right? And there it was. There it is. It just got laid out right in front, right? So that was, our strategy's not clear, and our team dynamics are awful. Maybe those are connected. And so finding how to integrate that personal stuff with the organizational stuff, I think was I like pushing OD on that point, right? Because I think both are important.
Obviously, on top of your own books that you produce, is there a resource that you recommend for people that sort of entering the field or just at the early stages, a book that's shaped your perspective or podcast or something like that that's really inspired you?
I try and read really broadly. So I'll read history, a lot of, and trying to understand how economies and societies evolve and grow. I'll read some really odd stuff. I try to read very, very broadly in terms of political philosophies. So I try to understand populist movements right now, the left and the right. It's so funny to me that the left and the right now today are like mirror images of what they were. So I don't know if it's any particular book, but I do try and do my best not to live in a bubble on that. I try and stay abreast of technology. It's just such a big deal. I actually spend a lot of time reading about writing, because we all have to write, whether it's an email or a letter or an article or a blog post and figuring out how to be clear in the way we communicate. I spend a lot of time trying to think about that craft, because when I read something really good, it sort of pierces the way I think. And I said, gosh, I wish I could do that. So I don't know if I have any specific, Danny, if I would say anything specific that I've read, or it's just, I try and read pretty broadly.
Yeah, well, it is interesting because it is a theme that's coming up, and as we ask that question, is it that a lot of it's the breadth, and the answer isn't just in the OD field; it's that curiosity, isn't it, and spotting the patterns and all that as well. Yeah. One of the original missions of this podcast was to inspire the next generation of OD practitioners coming through. With all the advice and all the insight that you've had over the years, what advice would you give someone who's considering a career in organisation development or just at the very beginning of it?
I would certainly come back to our earlier conversation about the importance of self. Doesn't matter whether you're in coaching and team building, and the more micro kinds of parts of the field or the macro parts. That what we share is a commitment to process, and that process includes my own. So if you haven't had therapy or find some way, maybe a coach can do it. Right, you can engage in a relationship with the coach where you say, I want to do some deep personal work, and find a coach that can help you do that work. I do think that's a foundation of the field. I think I'm young and I need the money. Okay. I do think organizations pay for skills. They pay for expertise. And if you like coaching or team building or process improvement or Six Sigma or supply chain or organization design or whatnot, I do think people pay for that. I would say, you got to hang your shingle and be known for something. But I would say be cautious about it, and don't forget that it's the system, stupid. All right. So do keep and maintain your awareness around everything else that's going on, and ask yourself, even if I'm doing micro work, am I doing it in service of making the organization better? And if you're doing macro work, do so with your eyes wide open about the impacts that macro work is going to have on people in the organization. So it's maintaining that awareness. We are operating in a system. And that one, I love it because it doesn't matter whether you're working in nonprofits or a startup or a big corporation. That principle applies. And so thinking about that system and your role in it and how you're playing with it, I think is kind of important.
Well, Chris, we want to say a huge thank you. I can't speak for Danny, but I've thoroughly enjoyed it.
She didn't look like she had any fun at all. I think that's the thing.
I'm supposed to take notes on the things that have stood out for me, and I've forgotten because I've been so engrossed. So on that note, Danny, what's stood out for you?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, it's hard to do it justice, but I think some of the things that have stuck with me are kind of that thing around the importance of capacity in your organization so you can leverage the capability. That really stuck with me. I think the importance of intention, it being really intentional about the future you're creating, and not sacrificing depth for speed, really struck with me. And then I think that thing about, are we working on our own needs or the needs of the client, and that kind of whole self as instrument piece.
If people want to follow your work, obviously you've got some brilliant books out there. And one of the things that we've really enjoyed is, because we do a lot of preparation for these interviews, has been the opportunity just to consume your material, your perspectives and that as well. What is the best people to follow your work or to engage in your books and that?
Well, I think that, these days, I put a stake in the ground, and I really haven't got, I've pretty much left Facebook, so I've got a page out there, but I don't do that anymore. If anything, I'm on LinkedIn. I post to LinkedIn every once in a while. I'm not a power user by any stretch, but a lot of times people reach out to me through LinkedIn. And if you do and I don't respond right away, it's because I'm not a power user. But if you DM me or want to connect, that's probably the most common way.
Yeah, well, what we'll do is we'll put your LinkedIn details in the show notes. And we'll also leave a link to your books in the show notes as well. So, and we do recommend people to read the books because they're just great. It's an opportunity just to sit with Chris's thinking for a prolonged period of time and see the brilliant research that you've done. So we want to say a huge thank you. If you are watching this podcast, we're always so impressed with the number of shares that we get. So we know that people that are watching this will be seeing others that they know that would really benefit from getting Chris's insights and experiences from his long and distinguished career as well. So please do that. And also we'd love it if you'd like and subscribe as well. But most importantly, Chris, we want to say a huge thank you on behalf of the OD profession. You've inspired so many of us and played such a huge part in our development. But thank you. And we've loved it. It's been brilliant.
What a great conversation. I love the range. I love the range of the conversation from T groups and personal stuff all the way to this agility and strategy stuff. I love the range. I think that's what the field's good at, can be good at. I think that's the place that we can play and make a difference.
Thank you so much.
Thank you guys. Be well. Be well.